All right. I think we've got a good number of folks that have already joined. So I think let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. We've got a fun format for you today. It's more like a chat with my friends. Today, my colleagues and I are excited to present a deep dive into a case study on the live and available Lynwood, California medium and heavy duty charging facility. So just a few words of housekeeping before we get started. Please keep yourself muted during the webinar to save us on some background noise. Lots of questions have already been submitted, so we're going to do our best to get through most of those. And I know that more are going to come up throughout, so feel free to drop anything into the chat. Of course, the recording and these slides will be available for you afterwards, so don't worry about that. To start, Justin Moe and I are going to be walking through a retrospective on the design, development, and launch of our live, medium, and heavy duty charging depot in Lynwood. Basically, we're just going to be hanging out and telling war stories. I'm just kidding. This is a super innovative depot, something we all collectively worked very hard on and are very proud to show you what we've built. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards to make sure that everything pressing gets covered. Our contact info is on the last slide, and please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to schedule a tour of the site. I feel like I'm asking Mo to get out there every other week, and honestly, I can't think of a better way to spend a workday. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So here's who you'll be hearing from today. Starting with yours truly, my name's Virginia Hewitt. I've been in the EV charging industry for about 6 years. Prior to this role, I was with Greenlots or Shell Recharge. At Voltera, my focus is on the medium and heavy duty vehicle classes, although I have seen it all. I have my bachelor's from Duke and my MBA from UNC at Chapel Hill. These schools are playing each other in men's basketball this weekend, Saturday at 4 p.m. Mountain, and I'll be wearing the darker shade as I cheer. All right, on to the more important people. Today I'm chatting with Justin Stick. He's Voltera's Director of Construction. Justin's been with Voltera for 2.5 years. And within the project lifecycle, Justin and his team focus on detailed design, entitlements, permitting, utility coordination, construction administration. Before Voltera, Justin worked at the automaker Rivian, leading their efforts to scale the ambitious L2 charging network. And prior to that, Justin worked at a tech company focused on developing corporate real estate around the globe. Justin lives in Northern California, and he's been described as a gift to cycling, taking in local routes and destinations. Next, we've got Mo Dolly. Mo is Voltera's head of hardware engineering, meaning he's to blame for all the awesome tech we have installed at each of our sites. He brings over 7 years of experience in the EV charging industry and has a comprehensive background in the selection, sourcing, and installation of EV charging equipment. Prior to Voltera, Mo was with Rivian, and prior to that, at Greenlots with me. Throughout his career, Mo served as a systems engineer and has led teams of validation engineers focused on building and qualifying DC fast charging equipment. Mo's expertise also spans cloud integration, ensuring seamless interoperability, making him a key contributor to the growth and evolution of EV charging technology. When he's not touring our facilities or running diligence at a vendor site, he's skateboarding on Broadway or taking his Rivian and his dog Dakota on a hike in the hills. All right, on to the next slide. As just a bit of background, Voltera entered the market in 2021 with a goal of enabling fleets by providing access to charging no matter where they were on their electrification journey. If you're ready to charge or think about charging, we're ready to talk. Voltera is a developer, owner, and operator of large-scale EV charging depots. We build depots for multiple fleet tenants to use as neighbors. We call that co-locate, and that's what we'll be talking about today. We also build depots for a single fleet customer to take control of. These depots can be on new parcels that Voltera has purchased or behind your fence. We pull everything together so you don't have to. The land, hardware, software, operations, allowing our fleet customers to access the charging that they need. Not more than they need, not what they might need in 5 years, but rather we provide a scalable option right where you need it. Truly, we've built depots as a service. Next slide, Shelby. Okay, on to the fun stuff. So to set the scene a bit, starting with this map view, you can see that the parcel we landed on for this project is directly on the 710, which is a straight shot up from the Port of Long Beach and heads out to the Inland Empire. So pretty clearly, this land use fits the use case of drayage and dedicated routes in region. Once we landed on this parcel, the design team came into action. At the time of design, we were primarily focused on the needs of our original anchor tenant, but we extrapolated their needs across the whole site. So, Justin, you want to walk us through from the top?
Yeah, but one thing to clarify, well, I like to think I'm a gifted cyclist. I'm amateur at best, just to put that out there. But yeah, next slide, Shelby. I'll elaborate on the process of design with our customer and how we developed a site that met the needs of our customer, but also allowed them to scale in the right way. So it's worth noting that when we engaged with our customer, they were very much a startup and didn't have much developed by way of design or operational standards. So we didn't have much to start from in order to get the design going. Voltera leveraged our own internal know-how of how drayage sites should operate, and coupled that with some of the feedback that we extrapolated through conversations with our customer and really plugged questions on their past operational experience and then their desires for how the site should function. And through those conversations, we ended up with a couple of major design themes, with those being, single stall versus a pull-through stall, a dedicated site versus a multi-tenant or co-location engagement, just like Virginia said earlier, the right combination of site amenities, and then specific operational needs and requirements. So as we approach the design process with these couple of major themes, we worked with our customer to weave in their wants, their desires, their preferences, and went through a couple of iterations, developed some pros and cons, and finally arrived at the test that you see on the right-hand side of this slide. Keen eyes will notice that, yep, the site is in fact optimized for bobtail trucking, and not to say that we didn't think about pull-through. We certainly know that the market um, needs and wants that too. But this setup worked best for the customer at this stage of their program. We did design the site in such a way, though, that the site could be reconfigured to accommodate pull-through charging at a future date with some reconfiguration of those middle charging islands. And the finished product here really lends itself well to a customer for a single site use or a co-location type of arrangement here too. Next slide. The next theme that I wanted to hit on is some construction excellence, right? And the first bullet point being asking the right questions, I think is probably the biggest theme we took and approached our process with. So as I mentioned earlier, the customer being very much a startup who didn't have a set of operational or design guidelines, we worked closely with the customer to, again, understand what they wanted, what they needed, and what was important to them to drive the discussion of developing those site requirements. Going through the design process, we took those requirements and morphed them into a set of programming and then iterated on that programming to develop the approved site design. So those conversations really manifested their way into some key components of the site, be it vehicle circulation, where trucks ingress and egress, the optimal parking orientation, and then ultimately the low voltage and the security requirements of the site. And again, thinking about that single versus co-location type of arrangement, the site, as was finally designed, is able to accommodate all those different types of things.
Hey,
Um,
Justin,
yeah.
before we move on, since one of these pictures here is from, active construction and we can see the actual dirt, on the site, a question came in from the crowd that I haven't been asked before. How important are soil and subsurface conditions in selecting sites for charging stations? And maybe just say a few words about what we look for in there during the selection and then what we sort of manage or mitigate, especially in the Southern California, LA Long Beach area, in regards to soil and subsurface.
Yeah, really good question. And I guess I can answer it in two parts. There's kind of the general approach of our sites nationally, and subsoil service conditions can kind of find their way into our projects when we're trenching, right? And understanding the depth of our trenches and then kind of what lay beneath. And it's tough when you're in industrial areas. Inevitably, there's always going to be elements of soil contamination. So doing that testing and getting that right, or at least knowing what you're up against in the early stage of due diligence, is super helpful. And then kind of taking a more localized approach to that question in LA, for those of you who've done projects in LA, the LIDS requirement, low impact development, is a surface kind of programmed to make sure that rainwater, any water that accumulates on site, gets treated first before it gets plugged into the water system. Like that becomes a really, I'd say, substantial milestone that you need to get through in the design process with LADBS. So it certainly is an important consideration and ultimately something that we try to knock out as soon as, or even before we acquire a site. So yeah, good question.
Cool, thanks.
And again, yeah, staying on that theme of asking those right questions, ultimately led us to working with our customer to develop a really good, scalable design. And then it also led us to our key design partners too. And I think it's worth noting that anyone attending this call can certainly recognize the nascency of our industry. And there's just not a ton of design and construction partners who have fleet charging experience. And so asking those right questions led us to some of the partners that we ended up selecting, given that no one really quite had the perfect background. Um, and so what we were ultimately looking for, the commonalities that we found were probably adjacencies in heavy civil, heavy infrastructure, or industrial development. And those were the partners we ended up going with. Another key component too was whether we went with a localized team or maybe a larger type of EPC or design build firm that had a national reach. And we ended up going with a team that was more local to LA, and we thought that was important for a couple of reasons. But it was really demonstrated when we had to navigate the various twists and turns of the project throughout us, where our team was able to leverage some of their longstanding relationships and connections to see us through some of those challenges. So.
Before we move on, Justin, another question came in that I think is a good one, talking about the idea of digging once. So a lot of our sites that are under design or under development are multi-phase projects. This is an example of a single phase, right? We went in and we sort of knocked it out. Yes, of course, there were phases, but they were just immediately concurrent to one another. Can you talk a bit about the importance of digging once, or like what all does that mean, especially in context of a multi-phase project?
Yeah, so for some customers, right, they need, X amount of capacity today, but they also need room to grow. And one of the biggest challenges for our customers ultimately is the cost of construction, right? And doing and splitting a project up into multiple phases elongates construction and adds on costs, right? There's a premium associated with it. So really early on in a project, when we're working with a customer who wants some of that type of scalability, we really try to assess the economics of what's best for them. And you're left with two options, right? You cut the project up into pieces and you build out certain portions of it to use at a certain phase, and then come back at a later date once they're ready for that additional capacity, or we try to future-proof the site as best we can. And the benefit of future-proofing or digging once, as you would say, is that there's economies of scale that you can leverage by having all the trades and the equipment and the various partners available on site. But it's not as easy as just kind of simply trying to get it all done, right? Your design has to be done, permitted, and approved by city jurisdictions in a manner that factors for that future proofing, right? So it's an approach that really needs to be thought out and weaved into the project at an early stage. But one, I think, for the right situation, can certainly save ourselves and the customer some money long term.
All right. Sounds
Um,
good.
yeah, next slide here. So one of the other things that I think is omnipresent on everyone's mind in this industry is supply chain challenges. And I'm sure there's plenty of thoughts and opinions and questions here too. But once we pin down our site layout, our number of stalls, our overall nameplate power demand for the site, we immediately and almost simultaneously were working on our long lead equipment solutions for the project. Speed to market was a key priority, as it is for every customer, right? So from our project's onset, we knew that we would need to figure out ways to improve the long lead equipment that we needed on site, and frankly, pieces of equipment that we knew would take over a year to source. So when we sat down and developed the critical path of the project, lead time of electrical equipment immediately came out as a hypersensitive requirement. And in particular, our made to order metering switchgear, which is shown here, was a really happy day for me when we finally craned those into position. Um, so we took an approach to design process with this strategy, prioritizing the critical path at all stages. So a good example of that is focusing on key design milestones. And as it relates to this metering switchgear, we identified completion of our shop drawings in order to get them submitted to what we knew was going to be a really lengthy utility review. So we worked with our partner, our manufacturing partner, to identify what critical decisions and key design decisions we had to make to enable them to get the shop drawings done in the shortest amount of time, and then hold them and get them submitted into the utility. And by taking this approach, it actually led to a non-linear design process. But that non-linear design process actually allowed us to get some of those critical path items out of the way earlier and ultimately improve the overall delivery of the schedule. Um, so the other component here that we tried to focus on was outlays of cash, right? And we all know that this equipment is expensive, and understanding at what points we needed to issue deposits and cut checks, so that we were waiting around for accounting paces to catch up with us was another critical component too. And then on the theme of war stories that Virginia hinted to, this next one was one that was really impactful. We were ultimately caught up in a bit of a geopolitical conflict here. A couple of months into the manufacturing of our metering switchgear, we received some troubling news that a critical component of that gear was being fabricated in Poland, that was also comprised of materials coming out of Ukraine. The news that we received was that this component was just out of production, and there was no timeline or scale as to when we could expect production to be picked back up, given the fact that this geopolitical conflict was way bigger than just this critical component of gear that we needed. It was a really stressful couple of weeks. But ultimately, we were able to work with our partner to source an alternate product that really was a handful of suppliers available to us, and get it plugged back in. And not saying we didn't lose time, but I think we minimized the amount of time on fabrication of that gear. And again, really focused on that theme of asking the right questions. And really, I think that's the closing element here, is asking really engaged and informative questions with our supplier, kept that supplier engaged over the course of the 12 months plus that we were working with them. And also understanding maybe how the kit of parts work together of that gear is what allowed us to be able to sidestep the impact of that delayed piece of equipment for our metering switchgear. And led us to keeping a really kind of long lead piece of equipment on track and delivering our project on time. So
Wow, Justin, I was kidding about war stories, but true to nature, you were able to make one happen.
took it there.
So, so thanks for that. Let's move on to the next slide. And just one quick reminder, Voltera isn't a manufacturer. Rather, Mo, as our head of hardware engineering, is the one responsible for choosing which of the big sexy robots we install on site. So moving on to the next slide. Mo, do you want to walk us through your process here?
Yeah, thanks, Virginia, and thanks, Justin. I think I've got the most fun portion here, which is like the actual charging, plug it in, make it happen, come in, get all try to take as much of the glory as I can after Justin's done all the hard work of building the site. So at this site, as you guys can see in the photo here, we've got 65 of these Zorova 180 kW chargers. These chargers were, selected specifically based on customer requirements. We look at things like the energy needed, the daily routes, and of course, with customer inputs, select the hardware. Uh, on this slide, I really want to call out that there's a large amount of diligence that goes into this before selecting hardware. For us, and especially for fleet charging, we've got a very heavy focus on reliability, right? We want to make sure that these chargers are working all the time. I'm sure like anybody in the audience that's driven an EV has had that experience of being on a road trip and pulling up and half the site is down or you're waiting in line. So really doing what we can to avoid that. And the way that we do that is before the site even gets built, we're really trying to have a close partnership with our OEM partners. And Zorova's been a really good partner for us. And a few things I'll call out for this is the integration work we're doing ahead of time, to get this hooked up to our cloud is really critical, and that helps us achieve a couple of things. Number one is um, energy solutions. So at this site, we've got it fitted for a really large amount of power. We have 12 megawatts of charging infrastructure, not quite as much power, so we are load sharing, and it's really important to make sure this is working before day one. The other one I'll call out is really getting the data from these chargers. So I think everybody at this point, gets data around the charging session, like what time did it start, what time did it stop, etc. What we're really interested in is not just that, but the actual things that can go wrong, right? When we get an error code from the charger, we want to know, not just that it's error code XYZ, but we want to know what part does it impact. We want to be able to, when we send our technician out to site, send them out with the specific part they need, right? Save time on downtime, save money, frankly, by not having to do a second truck roll. So this is all work we're doing ahead of time for the site.
So Mo, before we move on, one of our friends out there asked specifically in regards to this data piece, what is the necessary back end and data integration sort of specifically that you're looking for? Like what's required of the charger OEM to achieve it? Don't go overboard, but like do you have a tip or two that some of our OEM, listeners may into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't tempt me to go overboard here because I will. But
By overboard, I meant over my head. So
so yeah, I think the standard integration that basically is in the industry is this OCPP integration. I think everybody is doing that, which is all well and good. It's like decently mature at this point. What we're looking for really is the data beyond that, right? So as I alluded to earlier, OCPP is fine for giving you an error code, right? Error 1, 2, 3, 4, but we want to be able to tie that into an actual action. Another one I'll mention, which is really important for interoperability testing or interoperability just in general, which is making sure that this specific charger will work with this specific make and model of vehicle, is actually getting access to this communication layer between the charger and the vehicle. That's something that's been really challenging in the industry. I think that hopefully the industry together is moving forward around more transparency around this data, but this is really critical to um, improving things like first plug success over time, identifying issues, and like I'm sure everybody's had that experience where you plug in, it doesn't work, and it's like what is going on, right? So having this additional data just beyond OCPP is really critical to understanding what these issues are and ultimately root causing them and coming up with a solution. Thanks, Virginia. I think next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, I talked about all the diligence we do ahead of time, which is really important to make sure that when the site is ready, that we commission it and we're ready to go. So on this slide, I've got like what is going on after opening. So we try to make use of all of this diligence that we've done ahead of time. So we have got our own, you can think of like tier one knock team, and they are the ones that will proactively monitor the site. So every day we're looking things like the statuses, what faults appeared, and with enough time, we try to learn and pull in more and more issues to things that can be solved at our tier one. And of course, for like new issues, we've got, as I mentioned, close partnerships with the OEMs, and we'll try to close the loop and with enough time, right, be able to address issues head on as soon as they appear. Another thing to call out here, like for this site and for really all Voltera sites, we have a big advantage of having a large amount of chargers at one location. right? Which is I think a huge advantage was public charging. You may see like 4 to 6 chargers. So a few things that allows us to do. Number one, we can really strategically locate our spare parts. We've got a spare parts kit and we have it very near the site. If anything happens, we quickly get the part and deliver it. And number two, this allows us to also hardwire all of these, which is I think something people sometimes don't think about. But we've got not only cellular in these, but primarily we've got hardwired internet to all of these chargers, which is really critical to support all of these applications we're running. The two that I'll mention here is the load sharing. Again, we have more charging hardware at the site than we've got power, which relies on the internet, and then all of the messages from the charger, including faults, statuses, etc. So we found that by hardwiring them, and we still have the cellular backup, but really by hardwiring them, we have like very high connectivity uptime, greater than 99.9. And that helps us with this proactive maintenance approach that we're taking at the site. All of this data, and I'll show this on the next slide, but all of this data that we have, of course, goes to our back end, which is available on a single pane of glass. But we also acknowledge that a lot of fleet operators, they've got their own systems, right? They probably have not just electric vehicles, but they've got a fleet of, a multitude of different vehicles and probably 3, 4 systems they're using already. So while I think like our Voltera Cloud and Portal is very nice, like we certainly are not trying to twist anyone's arm to use it. All the data that's there is also available via API, can be integrated into existing systems. And one other thing on this slide before I move on, I'm going to talk about, and I mentioned it a couple of times, but I'm just going to dig in a little bit deeper here, is the load sharing and energy applications that we're running. So, we have the capability to do different like time of use optimization and all types of different energy solutions. At this particular site, we thought ahead and built out 12 megawatts of charging infrastructure, which is like it's a lot of power, right? What we have right now is 7 megawatts of power, which is still a huge amount of power. And the way this works at our site is that, you can imagine like the first 40, 50 vehicles that plug in, they can charge at max rate up until we get to that 7 megawatt threshold. Every vehicle that plugs in after that, we're kind of tapering across the site accordingly, such that we never exceed the 7 megawatt limit. At a later date, when we get to 12 megawatts, like it's literally like going online and flipping a switch, and you're ready to go with more power.
So Mo, I know we're mostly talking about Lynwood, today, but your point of having 12 megawatts, of charging capacity, only taking in 7 megawatts from the grid is something that your team, your office is like a real expert on. Recently, folks listening out there, Voltera announced that we were awarded one of the Super Truck Awards, the one that we're in partnership with Utah State University and the Aspire Network, where once again, Mo's design for more charging capacity than grid availability is coming into play. Could you just say one or two more words on that sort of as a theme, Mo? I think we're going to be seeing it, more and more. Is there hardware strategies, software, both operational? Truly, how do we get there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's all the above. Before I answer, like, I'll just highlight the fact that you said only 7 megawatts. I think you don't often hear the adjective or the phrase only 7 megawatts. Still quite a bit of power. But yeah, we take an approach where I think it's easy if you're a operator that has a bunch of these vehicles to say that, all right, my vehicle can charge at 200 kW. I've got 30 of these, therefore I need 30 times 200 kW, right? And maybe not take into consideration that all the vehicles aren't arriving empty and plugging in at the same time, or maybe they taper off at the end of the charge curve. So in reality, I think like once you start to do those exercises, you see that maybe you don't need quite as much power as you thought, and that makes things really easier to get started. Whether you want to take a phased approach, or build outs just like for what you need now, and then as your fleet grows, or maybe your your new vehicles charge higher power, you can grow with that. As far as your reference to the Utah State, yes, that's true. Like this load sharing, we've got it at multiple sites. As I mentioned, we could do it like based on a schedule, depending what we're optimizing for. Today, I think like and I strongly believe this is the right focus for anybody doing this or we're optimizing for is like charging needs, right? For this to take off, which I very much want the industry to continue to grow, the priority needs to be that these vehicles have the juice they need to be able to run their routes. So that's priority number one. And then number two and three, like then we look to optimize these other items.
Nice. So as we're moving on to the next slide, and not to put you on the spot, Justin, but just super quickly, building off of this theme, what are the construction implications for this theme, right? Having the capacity to bring in more power, but just designing and launching, a smaller amount of power day one. Is it a different size wire? Is it a different type of trench? Like, just super quickly, what are the things that you consider along the lines of this theme?
Yeah, it was I was like holding back from
I knew you were.
unmuting myself because yeah, it's and this really again I think exemplifies how much of a team effort it is. All of the things that Mo described, the creative solutions that we can offer on the software side with load sharing, power balancing, and even scalability of power is great, but it's a demonstrated competency that Volterra has. And you can't just walk into any utility and outline this plan and have them roll over and approve it. Utilities want to see both a hardware solution, meaning physical components and switches and fusing and things like that to protect the grid, which first and foremost, and then there also has to be a software solution, so a belt and suspenders approach to be able to pull this off. So the things that you see that ultimately affects the way our long lead equipment is designed, and all of that stuff needs to be settled very, very early on in a project. As I explained with shop drawings and approval processes, it's one of like the first things on the critical path. But then it's also very material in the equipment selections, the wire gauges, right, and some of the infrastructure that we have to install. And so, just like Mo said, when we start to take into consideration charging curves and dwell time of vehicles, if you just kind of do back of the napkin math and just kind of assume at face value that you need X power, but when you really start to take into some of those factors, Mo communicated, that power requirement comes down, right? And by reducing that power requirement, you can save money on the capital investment of the project and ultimately build the site for cheaper, right? And so having a good partner like Volterra, who kind of knows what to look for and how to design things creatively, really like is a material offering. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tying that up for us. Mo, how about back over to you talking about sort of the single pane of glass that our customers look at?
Yeah, and maybe if actually we can just back up one slide for a second here. There was a question about uptime and SLAs. Yes, we offer uptime guarantees. I think it's like pretty standard now. Everybody in the industry has been looking at talking about uptime, which I think is very important, something we're looking at as well. But one other thing I want to make sure to mention is the other data that we are looking at, for our own sites. And one I will specifically call out is first plug success. I think on the question list, I saw somebody ask about it, but what this first plug success is really a measure of like the charging experience between, and it's really dependent on a specific vehicle and a specific charger, but what it measures is basically every time you plug in, like as a percentage, how many times does it make it into the charging flow? Right? And that may be like the charger could be great, everything's working with it just fine. Maybe there's a software update that pushed on either side that kind of made the experience not as good. And so this is something we're actively measuring, right? Everybody ideally would like to get to 100% first plug success. I've never seen that, but if you're keeping an eye on it, we can at least try to, that coupled with this data that we're getting that showing the communication with the vehicle and the charger, we can drive that number upwards. And I think measuring that alongside with uptime will hopefully create like a very good charging experience. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, I won't spend too much time on this, but it's just a screen grab of our single pane of glass. Like what I'll call out here is that, as I mentioned, all of the data that you see on the screen is also available via like backend API integration. I think this is very pretty, but you're not like forced into using it if you want this data. On the screen here, I mean, this is just one screen of a few, but I think a few things I'll call out. There's a lot of different platforms out there like this. I already mentioned the data API thing. The other things I'll call out here is that, on the sessions screen we're looking at here, you've got the specific vehicle information, right? The license plate, MAC address, and you can, get a list like for each vehicle. You can see how much energy has it consumed, when does it charge, what state of charge does it arrive at. And then one other thing I'll call attention to is this tickets tab. This is, I think, a differentiator for us. Not just that, I think everybody has tickets, but for our site, we're really taking care of the full site, soup to nuts. Like it's not just about charging. We're doing the, landscaping, street sweeping, all of that stuff. So in this screen, you can create, if you have a charging issue, you can click on it and create a ticket. But you can also and you can upload a photo too. That way you have it there. But you can also do things like if the toilet's clogged, you can take a ticket, put it on there. Please do not upload a photo, but we'll come out there and take care of it. Next slide. All right, this is the last one here for me, and yeah, that is me in the bottom right
Gotcha.
from our.
Snuck one in.
Thanks for This is a surprise for me. I hadn't seen that this one got added, but this is from our ride and drive event where we opened up the site to a multitude of different vehicle OEMs, to come try out the hardware yourself, make sure that it's interoperable and that it's charging as you expect. So yeah, this was in Lynwood at this specific site. I think the last thing I want to really call out here, I've alluded a bit to how we have more chargers than we have capacity. The other thing I'll call out at the site is like we're really trying to think about the future for this site, right? Things like not just the power that I mentioned, but things like, hey, there's been a big push, at least in the medium light duty to go to NACS. Like, can we get NACS connectors, the Tesla plug on these chargers? Right? Yeah, we can do. Right? Or later down the road, the way that we've designed, and this is a testament to Justin, but the way that we've designed upstream, these transformer sizes, switchboard sizes, if at the end of life of these chargers, if we need to bring in, a megawatt charger or something high power, something to kind of keep up with the industry, that's all been thought out and designed. And then lastly, which is also a credit to Justin, is we have, upstream at each switch, we have quick connects there, right? And what that's for is that, again, just thinking forward, right? If we have somebody that has like a big resiliency requirement, or there's an outage for an extended period of time, we've got the ability to roll up and connect some alternate energy right there. So yeah, really, I think well done by Justin and the team to think of this stuff out ahead of time, and be ready for the future. Virginia?
All right. Next slide, please. Okay, folks. Well, there you have it. All the background and the in-depth look at how we stood up this, in my opinion, gorgeous site and connected it to the grid in record time. We are live and open. If you've got anything electric, from a Class 8 cab to a medium duty, van or box truck, we'd absolutely love to chat and see if this site would be a fit to continue your operations. As you can see from this image, this is not just purely a charging site, but it is a fully operational depot, with the intent it being that you'd be able to really extend your operations into this depot, whether it's at a single dedicated charger, a row of chargers, or an entire bay. I guess we can move on to the next slide. Oh, great. Oh, okay. Well, quite Q&A. So I guess just to finish up, if there are any questions about this site specifically, any interest in maybe coming out for a tour, just drop us a line and let us know. But otherwise, let's see if there are any more questions in the chat. We were able to get through, quite a few of them as we went. Just more and more questions about power availability. I think that this is something that we're seeing all across at least Southern California and maybe, nationwide. So Mo or Justin, anyone that'd like to take it, any issues with power availability at the site? Like how long, for example, did it take to secure power to turn on, that first megawatt? Um, how do we exactly work with the utility to help them understand peak loads, peak power? Maybe what will we be looking for to turn on those incremental megawatts as we're moving forward?
Yeah, really good question. And I think the one that's probably at the forefront of everyone's mind, right, is utilities take a long time to get this power. And it's kind of like an answer that's you can respond to in a couple different ways, right? I think first it begins with outreach to the utility, right? Volterra goes to great lengths to maintain relationships with the utilities in the markets that we're in and other key markets that we want to be in. And so we start from the very beginning introducing ourselves to them, right? Who we are, what we do, and making sure that there's shared goals and alignment, right? And I think having that personal connection with our utilities probably yields some success in the form of getting connected to the right individuals. And kind of pivoting to a little bit to a question about some of these creative solutions of oversubscribing or undersubscribing, right? That relationship initially with the utilities, I think what allows us to start engagement at a really early place in a site design to even start those conversations. But back to some of the themes that I discussed in the slides that I covered, managing our utilities really starts with, again, asking those right questions. And I know everyone's busy. We've all got a ton of meetings, but having the right preparation and understanding where we're at and where we should be in either our utility design or the utility sourcing of equipment and asking those informed questions is how at least the best we can do to manage our utilities right now. And so that's going to lengths of, again, asking questions about the design process and what the next steps are and understanding to the extent, what's next and what should be next up in the queue, and then basing that experience off of experiences that we've had maybe in an LA market with the experience across the country in a different market as well. So just continuing to stay engaged in developing and cultivating those relationships, having that personal touch is one way we try to manage it. And then the other piece, obviously, is resiliency, right? If we can't have power by the date that we need it, what can we do, right? What are alternate means of powering the site? And those are things that we go to great lengths to understand, right? And I suppose it's easier for me from the design and construction point of view to just build in the ability to have some resiliency, but it's a lot more challenging for someone like Mo, who's responsible for actually managing that flow of energy to the vehicles. So again, it's a really holistic approach that we take. It's not really something that I think is just decided on a per site basis, but more as a portfolio strategy should this come up, right? Like what can we do? So I know I've talked a lot, but Mo, maybe if you have anything else to offer.
Yeah, I think that was a really good answer. I think the only thing I would add, and there was a specific question in here about at this site, were there any of those kinds of issues? So, I mean, I can answer that pretty directly. Yes. We did have like construction was complete. We were ready to kind of flip the switch, turn it on. And yeah, we did, as Justin mentioned, we'd already designed in these quick connects, we rolled in some micro turbines, and we were able to operate the site. Using that for a few months until we have like full power, which we now do, right? So there's no kind of additional generation at the site. This is 100% grid connected. But yeah, of course, like we plan for that ahead of time. It's not like the ideal solution, but I sleep fine at night knowing that we were able to enable electrification, right? And at some point, like, there's need dates and all of these things. Like at some point, you got to just be able to start electrons flowing.
So Mo, just to take that one step further, a question came in. You mentioned, one or two, ways that we brought additional power into the site, either here or in some other designs that you've done, with Volterra. How might we integrate an off-grid, source of power to a charging site? And do we have any of those coming up?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question there, but yes, yeah, there's I think the industry has been moving quite quickly on these, and I don't want to I'd love to answer your question more directly, but the truth is like this is so dependent on the jurisdiction, the kind of vehicles you have, the energy needs and demands. But yeah, we can go off grid. There's quite a few solutions and partners we're working with now that have above ground raceways that enable some like DC to DC charging with some upstream battery energy storage and ultimately some kind of like natural gas or some energy producing like you can't, you got to have something make the energy. You can't pull it out of thin air, either as a supplement to the existing grid power or totally islanded. Um, yeah, I think that was like maybe a bit high level to be very useful, but I think just the takeaway would be that yeah, we can, and there's a lot of inputs that go into making the right decision there.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that too. Maybe looking at that solution from like commercial terms too. You know, any site that we're designing to serve maybe like a drayage market is going to be close to a port or in some sort of urban or metro location, and that means space is tight, and it comes at a premium. And so I think it's maybe like a misconceived notion to people who are less familiar with the actual requirements of resiliency, but a lot of people like to think, well, like, oh, well, can't you just throw a battery in there or something, or can't you just do some sort of DER or some sort of off-grid solution? And the answer is yes, of course, but that comes at the expense of a lot of space and clearance on site, which ultimately reduces the number of chargers or charging stalls on a site, which ultimately dilutes maybe some of the value proposition, right, of the site for a customer. So really all this goes back to understanding and setting expectations really early on with our customer on what's important, right? Is it quantity and volume of charges? Is it throughput and minimizing dwell time, right? And that lends itself to, I think, the right combination of resiliency and stall count and kind of how the site is laid out. So like all things, the answer is never clear. And it's challenging, but it's again asking the right questions and knowing where some of these different paths will take you in the design and the frankly the cost of the build out too.
Awesome. There's a question in here that I think I'll take. It's from our friend Jerry at Rivian, asking if our hardware solutions are a fit for the airport rental car center market. So Jerry, yes, absolutely. What you're seeing here today is a co-located or co-locatable heavy and medium duty charging depot, but this isn't the total picture of what Volterra can design and build, right? We build on behalf of other brands, launching what I would call a branded network. So that would be a depot coming up, in a city near you where Volterra applies our, skills and expertise in the real estate side of things, identifying and securing parcels, over to Justin's team, designing and constructing, exactly what that brand needs. And then when you see it on the road, it'll be, a branded network powered by Volterra. And that can affect the light duty market, medium and heavy, like we're seeing here, as well as bus and transit. And so the broad scope of our core competencies, what Justin and Mo talked through today, all of those big rocks and key puzzle pieces can be applied across electrification in the fleet space generally. And so if there is a specific project you have in mind, I'm probably your best point of contact to get started, to learn more and start specking something out. But yes, that was a great question, and we'd love to chat. Okay, let's see.
There's a couple like low-hanging fruit questions, Virginia, that I can address
Problem.
too. There's a question about do we have space near the site to drop trailers? This particular site in Lynwood actually has 3 or 4 trailer storage stalls as well on site. So in the event, yeah, a truck is returning to charge with a trailer, it can be dropped on site. And then there's more capacity that's required. We do have line of sight to some additional overflow space as well. Um, And then I think we've been talking about resiliency and off-grid sources of power to charging sites. That's another question that's in here. And the answer is yes, always. We're always evaluating it. It's just, again, designing these sites for particular end users in mind. It really comes down to the customer preferences if this is something that we pursue. So.
Excellent. Well, a few more questions are coming into the chat. Shelby, how about you scoot forward a few slides so that we can show key insights, of what we talked about today. Everyone will have access to these slides, but I really wanted to show these playbooks. So Voltera's team is so happy to share our insights, to share our skills and abilities with the market in the theme of, a rising tide, lifts all ships. So we have designed and launched these four, and actually a fifth one is coming out soon, right? Playbooks on sort of how we do what we do, right? The Electrification at Scale series. So Shelby, if you go back just one more so I can talk through sort of their titles, starting with the real estate identification. Remembering back to the beginning of this conversation, we talked about what are the requirements of this fleet, of their duty cycle, and how do we pair those requirements to a land parcel for the best fit solution. That's where we start. We have a whole real estate team dedicated to that. Then we move on to power procurement. How do we make sure that the amount of power that we need is being brought to site? Mo and Justin talked through that left and right in this conversation, but you'll be able to dig in even more with this playbook. The third one is how to design, the best fit depot for your use case. That can be a co-located depot, that can be one that's built just specifically for you, or one that's built for you as primary, and then your ecosystem partners or other fleets that may be running certain routes for you as secondary. And then finally, design, construction, how we actually put these things into the ground, sink the wire, and turn the key to start charging. Let's go back to the questions, and okay, and then we do have a final playbook, tying it all together, bringing everything in to a finally actually operating depot. Goes far beyond hardware and software and into the actual operations of a site, and that can be as broad as security, landscaping, janitorial, or as specific as bringing in the telematics from a vehicle into a single pane of glass like Mo was showing earlier. Okay, so a question that I'll answer just super quickly. What about powering reefers? That is on our roadmap. So for folks that don't know, a reefer means a refrigerated trailer, and that would be used typically for cold chain, supply chain, so cold storage of food that needs to stay food and beverages that need to stay refrigerated. And it is a trailer that typically has, in the electrification space, has a battery associated to it and charges on site while the cab is charging, but through different protocols. So yes, if you are running a fleet with, electric reefer trailers, talk to us and we'll be able to design how and where your refrigerated trailers are being plugged into shore power at these sites. This one at Lynwood doesn't have that set up inherently, but it's not something that would be too difficult to add in. Turning it back over to Justin and Mo, another question came in about how we're managing demand charges without battery energy storage. I know a few of the projects that Mo's been working on and designing does include battery energy storage. But Mo, talk us through this one.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's a pretty simple answer. The site doesn't currently have demand charges. There's a moratorium on demand charges, has been designed where we can add a battery, when the time comes. But yeah, as Justin was mentioning, the arithmetic is like just the trade-off of how much does this battery cost, how much room is it going to take up, and what's the benefit. So yeah, I think once we're a little closer to actually having demand charges, the math will swing more in the favor of putting a battery on site.
So
Anything to
most
add
talking
there?
about the moratorium at SCE, nationwide, there are still demand charges, and that is something that we need to consider, particularly in co-located sites where more than one fleet, are charging at the same time. And we do that, of course, with, some battery energy storage, but the first step is education, right? Walking a fleet through what does that demand charge look like? When does it hit? Can there be any changes to operations? Such that we don't need to go full speed charging during that demand or peak period. And then after education and maybe some changes to operations, software comes into play. So we can use software at the charger level and across the entire site to ensure a peak never goes above a certain amount, or that a charger, for example, can derate and then come back up, once that demand charge period is over. And then finally, of course, for our co-located sites, we have so much software built into these units, ensuring that each customer is only paying their own utility bill, right? So if your next door neighbor, two chargers over is blowing a peak, you won't be responsible for that. So really don't worry, about a co-located site in that manner. We do have it figured out, and we can walk you through what that looks like in a case by case basis.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I was speaking about demand charges at this site only. We do have batteries at other sites that we're planning.
And again, to double click on that, like the demand charge factor would be something that we've really netted out from an early inception on the project, given the impacts that it has in the design and the layout of the site too. And Voltaire is happy to model that stuff with our partner. And again, it comes down to asking those right questions. And in the case of the end user who used this site, I showed earlier that they really hadn't developed their operational strategy yet, even when they were taking this site. And that was something that we really focused on with them, is worked with what they needed to achieve and what their needs were, and tried to work out and balance, will the trucks be on the road to avoid, demand charges if it comes up. And then again, to Virginia's point, the software solution comes into play too to really avoid that. So it's part of that value add.
All right. Well, folks, we're coming up on time. Shelby, do we have one more slide sharing our contact info? Of course, anybody will be able to get in touch with us through Voltera's website. We've got a drop form. All of the playbooks that I highlighted earlier are available for download, at our website. And other than that, thank you everyone for joining this conversation today. We were more than happy to walk you through the background and the ins and outs of how we developed and launched our site at Lynwood. And if there's any interest in taking a tour, learning more, or maybe even charging your fleet there, feel free to drop us a line, get in touch. And more than likely, I'll be asking Mo to meet you out there. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye.